Part 1, a train ride that sparked a dream. My name is Ariel, and I am currently studying English literature. Today I would like to share with you the story of how I began my journey to learn English, a journey that began in a very unexpected way on a train ride during a sunny summer day. I remember it clearly. The sky was a brilliant shade of blue, and the warmth of the sun poured in through the train windows as I made my way across the city. I was sitting alone in one of the carriages, quietly watching the world outside, when two women stepped on and sat down directly across from me. They appeared to be deep in conversation, laughing occasionally, and speaking fluently in English. At that time, my English skills were very limited. I was still a beginner, having just started learning the language. I knew a few words and basic phrases, but understanding a full conversation was beyond me. As I listened to the two women speak, I felt a mixture of curiosity and frustration. I could pick out only a few familiar words here and there, but the meaning of their conversation remained out of reach. Yet, something inside me stirred. I didn't want to remain silent. I wanted to be part of that conversation, to understand and respond, to connect. Gathering my courage, I leaned forward and said hello. Using the most basic English I could manage, I introduced myself and explained, haltingly, that I was trying to learn English. To my surprise and relief, the woman smiled warmly. Not only did they understand me, but they responded kindly, encouraging my effort. I told them, as best as I could, that I wanted to improve my English and someday speak it fluently. They told me they were from England and had just attended a conference. They were on their way home. We spoke for about 10 minutes, which at that time felt like a great achievement. Before we parted ways at the next station, one of the women handed me a small piece of paper with their contact information. They told me that if I ever visited England, I should feel free to reach out. We said goodbye, and I got off the train with a heart full of inspiration. That short conversation, though simple, became the moment that sparked a deep motivation in me. From that day forward, I made a firm decision. I would improve my English no matter what. I would study, practice, and push myself every day. I had experienced, even for just 10 minutes, the joy of being understood in another language, and I wanted to feel that again and again. Part 2, a new commitment to learn. The brief but meaningful exchange I had with those women on the train became a turning point in my life. From that moment, I was no longer just casually interested in learning English. I was committed. Something had changed inside me. I had tasted the satisfaction of real communication in another language, and I craved more. I wanted to be able to express myself fully, to understand native speakers effortlessly, and to open doors to opportunities that only English could offer me. So I made a promise to myself I would dedicate time every single day to learning English. No matter how tired I was or how busy my schedule became, I would find at least an hour to focus on English. And I didn't just want to memorize words, I wanted to live the language. At first, my methods were simple. I started with translating basic texts, especially those with everyday vocabulary. I chose articles, short stories, and even product instructions that had both English and my native language versions. By translating them, I began to understand sentence structure and how words fit together. It was slow work at first, but the process helped me build a foundation. I also turned to English language movies. I watched them with subtitles, first in my native language, then in English, and eventually without any subtitles at all. Watching films helped me in several ways. I picked up pronunciation, learnt how native speakers naturally phrased things, and gained exposure to informal speech and idioms. I often paused the movie to repeat sentences aloud, trying to match the intonation and rhythm of the actors. Sometimes I would write down interesting phrases and try to use them in conversation later. One of the most powerful tools I discovered during this period was music. I started listening to English songs and reading their lyrics. I sang along, even if I didn't understand everything at first. Slowly, I began to recognize repeated words and phrases. Music made learning enjoyable. It didn't feel like studying at all. The melodies stayed in my head, and so did the language. Within just a few months, my confidence began to grow. I still struggled with grammar and often used the wrong verb tense, but I was able to hold simple conversations. I could introduce myself, ask questions, and understand basic responses. My vocabulary expanded steadily, and I found myself thinking in English more and more, especially when I was alone. But even though I had made solid progress, I wanted more. I knew that to truly immerse myself in English, I needed to go where it was spoken every day, not just in movies or songs, but in real life. And that's when I made the decision to go to London. I wanted to experience English in its natural environment. I wanted to talk to native speakers, attend classes, and challenge myself in ways I never had before. Planning the trip was a big step. It meant leaving home, living in a new city, and adapting to a new culture. But I felt ready. My desire to learn outweighed my fear of the unknown. With savings from part-time work and the encouragement of a few friends, I booked my flight. I enrolled in an English language school in London and arranged for accommodation. I didn't know exactly what to expect, but I felt excited. I was ready to take my English learning to the next level, not just through books or apps, but through real life. Part 3, my first English class in London. Arriving in London felt like stepping into a new world. Everything around me, the language, the signs, the accents, the speed of life, was unfamiliar but thrilling. I was both nervous and excited. It was my first time living abroad, and although my English had improved over the past months, I still felt far from fluent. On Monday morning, I headed to the language school I had enrolled in. The building was modern and filled with students from all over the world. Some looked confident, chatting casually in English in the hallway. Others seemed just as nervous as I was, clutching notebooks and waiting quietly for a class to start. When I walked into the classroom, I was greeted by our teacher, a young woman with a calm presence and a friendly smile. She welcomed each student warmly, making sure we felt comfortable. She introduced herself simply and asked each of us to do the same. There were students from many countries: Brazil, Japan, Spain, South Korea, Turkey, Italy, and more. Each of us had different reasons for learning English. Some wanted to study at university, others needed it for work, and a few, like me, simply wanted to be able to communicate better and experience the world in a new way. After the introductions, our teacher shared her teaching philosophy. In this course, she said, we won't be spending much time on grammar drills or textbooks. Instead, we'll focus on using English every day in natural situations. This caught my attention immediately. I had always struggled with textbooks. The rules, the exceptions, the endless exercises, they confused me and made me lose motivation. But what our teacher was saying sounded refreshing. She believed that the best way to learn a language was by living it. She explained, language is not just a subject. It's a tool we use to express ourselves, to share ideas, to connect with others. If you want to get better at English, you need to speak it, hear it, read it, and think in it as much as possible. Then she added something that would shape the rest of my learning journey. Don't worry too much about being perfect. Fluency doesn't come from perfection, it comes from practice. The rest of the lesson was focused on speaking. We worked in pairs, asking and answering questions about our hobbies, our countries, and why we wanted to learn English. At first, I stumbled over my words, pausing often and searching for the right expressions. But I was surprised at how patient everyone was. Nobody laughed or judged me. In fact, many of us were struggling in the same way. By the end of that first class, something had changed. I no longer felt like a beginner who didn't belong. I felt like a learner among learners, all on the same path, supporting each other. The environment was positive and encouraging, and I left the classroom feeling hopeful. Later that day, I reflected on what the teacher had said. Her words made sense. Language is meant to be used, not just studied. I had spent months translating sentences and memorizing vocabulary, but now I realized that the real key was communication. That evening, I set a goal for myself. During my time in London, I would speak as much English as possible. I wouldn't worry about making mistakes. I would listen carefully, read often, think in English, and most importantly, I would speak every single day. Part 4, learning without textbooks. As my classes continued, I became more and more impressed by the method our teacher used. It was unlike anything I had experienced before. Instead of overwhelming us with grammar rules or asking us to memorize lists of irregular verbs, she encouraged us to interact, to express ourselves, and to learn by doing. She believed that the traditional way of studying languages through repetition, exercises, and tests was not always effective for real-world communication. Her philosophy was clear. To truly learn a language, you need to use it as much as possible. That meant speaking it daily, listening to it regularly, and thinking in it whenever you could. One morning, she started the lesson with a simple but powerful explanation. Many students, she said, spend years studying grammar, learning rules, and memorizing vocabulary, but they still can't hold a conversation. That's because knowing about a language is not the same as using it. This made perfect sense to me. I'd met people who could explain every tense in English but froze when asked a basic question like, "What did you do yesterday?" So instead of focusing on theory, our classes were filled with speaking activities. We shared stories about our lives, discussed our cultures, and described our routines. We asked each other questions and responded in real time. Sometimes we made mistakes, but our teacher always encouraged us to keep going. Her motto was, "Mistakes are proof that..." We also discussed what made language learning successful. According to her, the most important thing was purpose, having a reason to use the language. Language, she said, is for communication. It's how we express our thoughts, emotions, and ideas. When you use English to communicate something meaningful, you remember it better. She often reminded us not to aim for perfection, but for connection. It didn't matter if our grammar wasn't perfect. What mattered was whether we could get our message across. Over time, I noticed a change in myself. I started to feel more comfortable speaking up in class. My sentences flowed more naturally and I paused less often. I also began to enjoy the process more. Learning was no longer a chore. It became a part of my daily life. During one class, we talked about our hobbies. Some students liked reading novels, others enjoyed cooking or playing music. I shared that I liked writing journals in English. I found that writing helped me organize my thoughts and reflect on new vocabulary. Our teacher encouraged this and said that any kind of self-expression in English was a valuable tool. The class had become more than just a place to study. It was a small community. We learned from one another, celebrated our progress, and supported each other's goals. The diversity of accents, experiences, and stories made every conversation unique. Looking back, I realize how powerful this method was. Without relying on textbooks, we were gaining practical skills, real communication abilities that would serve us in everyday situations. I began to understand the true meaning of immersion. We weren't just studying English, we were living it. I'd still review grammar occasionally, especially when I got confused about something, but now I saw grammar as a helpful tool, not the main focus. The emphasis was on using the language to connect with others, and that made all the difference. Part 5. Discovering the power of reading. It was a Tuesday morning when one of my classmates asked a question that had been on many of our minds. What's the best way to learn new vocabulary? The classroom went quiet, everyone waiting eagerly for our teacher's response. He smiled and said, "That's a great question. There are many ways to learn new words, but if we look at the most effective one, statistically speaking, it's reading." At first I was surprised. I had always thought vocabulary came best from lists or flashcards. But she went on to explain, when you read regularly, especially things that interest you, your brain naturally absorbs new words. It's one of the fastest and most natural ways to build vocabulary. She encouraged us to read at least 30 minutes a day. This didn't matter whether it was fiction or non-fiction, a novel or a blog post, as long as it was something we enjoyed. The key was to stay engaged. If the texts were boring, we wouldn't retain much. But if we were interested, the new words would stick more easily. Always choose texts that are just a little bit above your current level, she advised. If it's too easy, you won't learn much. If it's too hard, you'll feel frustrated. Find that sweet spot where you understand most of the text, but still find new words in every paragraph. She also explained a simple technique. When you come across a new word, pause and look it up in a dictionary. Don't just skip over it. Read the definition and go back to a sentence. See how the word fits in context. And here's the interesting part. She told us not to worry about writing it down. The word is important. And if you read it in a meaningful context, your brain will remember it, she said. Repetition happens naturally when you read often. This changed the way I approached vocabulary. I used to obsess over memorizing word lists, trying to remember definitions out of context. But now I have started reading short stories and news articles that genuinely interest me. I didn't pressure myself to understand everything. I just stayed curious, and slowly my vocabulary started growing. Without the stress, there was another benefit too. Reading didn't just teach me new words, it showed me how those words were used. I learned how sentences were structured, how adjectives modified nouns, and how prepositions connected ideas. I saw real examples of grammar in action, which helped me internalize the rules more naturally than any textbook ever could. That same day, we had a conversation about student jobs in London. I mentioned that I wanted to find a part-time job so I could support myself and use English in a real-world setting. A few students suggested going to a job center. They explained that job centers often had listings specifically for students, and I could apply even if I didn't have much experience. Later that afternoon, I took their advice and visited a local job center. I was nervous, unsure of how I would explain myself in English. But the woman behind the counter was kind and spoke clearly. I told her I was looking for a job and didn't have much experience. She suggested two options: working as a cleaner or as a waitress in a cafe. When I said I'd never worked in a cafe before, she reassured me. "Your English is good enough to handle simple customer service," she said, "and it's a great way to keep practicing the language." She explained that training would be provided and that cafe work would give me more opportunities to talk to people than cleaning would. I thought about it for a moment and agreed. It sounded like the perfect chance to combine earning money with improving my English. She told me I could start on Thursday. I walked out of the job center with a paper in my hand and a mix of excitement and nervous in my heart. That evening, I remembered what the teacher had said. If you want to learn English well, you have to use it every day. Reading for 30 minutes, speaking whenever possible, listening to conversations, all of it mattered. Getting this job would be my next big step. Part 6. Learning through work. Thursday arrived sooner than I expected. It was the day I would begin my training at the cafe. I felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Although I had spoken some English in class and in casual conversations, I wasn't sure how I would manage in a busy work environment. Would I understand the customers? Would they understand me? When I arrived at the cafe, I was pleasantly surprised. The place had a modern and inviting atmosphere with warm lighting, polished tables, and the aroma of fresh coffee and baked goods filling the air. It wasn't just a small coffee stand, it was a real professional cafe with customers who seemed to know exactly what they wanted. The manager, a young woman in her mid-20s, welcomed me with a friendly smile. I was amazed by how confident and efficient she was. Despite her age, she ran the cafe like a seasoned professional. She had been working there for more than 2 years and seemed to know everything, from preparing complicated coffee orders to managing inventory and interacting with customers. She explained everything patiently: how to use the coffee machine, where to find clean dishes, how to take orders, and how to handle payments. I tried my best to pay attention, but I'll be honest, I only understood about 20% of what she said. There were too many new words, and she spoke faster than I was used to. Luckily, she didn't expect perfection. After her explanation, she asked me to try each task one at a time. Whenever I made a mistake, she corrected me gently and showed me the right way to do it. I learned by doing, which, as I would come to realize, is one of the most effective ways to learn anything. My first shift was intense. There were moments when I felt completely lost, especially when customers asked for something quickly or used slang I didn't recognize. But little by little, I adapted. I started recognizing patterns in their orders. I remembered how they liked their coffee. I learned common phrases like "for here" or "to go," and "would you like anything else?" Each interaction was a small lesson. I didn't always understand every word, but I got better at picking up meaning from context, tone, and gestures. And most importantly, I started to feel less afraid of making mistakes. I realized that most people were understanding and patient if you tried your best. By the end of my first day, I was completely exhausted, but in a good way. My feet ached, my head was full, but I was proud. I had survived my first real day of work in English. More than that, I had spoken English, understood English, and worked in English. That day felt like a major victory. But the next day, Friday, I went back to school. One of the students asked our teacher another important question. Sometimes when I speak, I'm not sure if I'm using correct grammar. What can I do to improve? Our teacher smiled, understanding the concern. There are two kinds of learners, she said. Some want to speak fluently and others need to pass an exam. If your goal is communication, like it is for most of you, you don't need to study grammar too much. You can learn it naturally. She explained that we had already done something similar with our first language. As children, we didn't learn by studying grammar books. We learned by listening, speaking, and gradually improving through practice and exposure. But, she added, if you want to strengthen your grammar along the way, reading and shadowing are your best friends. Reading exposes you to well-structured sentences, and shadowing helps you practice correct grammar patterns without even realizing it. She also recommended a helpful website that listed grammar rules by level, designed specifically for learners like us. It was a practical tool, not just theory-heavy explanations. Later that afternoon, I returned to work for my second shift. This time, I felt more prepared. I recognized returning customers and remembered how to make their drinks. I even managed to joke a little with one of them, which made both of us laugh. I could see that my English was improving, not just because I studied it, but because I was using it where it mattered. My cafe job became more than just a way to earn money. It became my practice ground. Every order, every conversation, every mistake was part of my learning journey, and little by little I was growing more confident, not just as an English speaker, but as a person. Part 7, the power of shadowing. The following week at school, something interesting happened during our class discussion. One of the quieter students, a young man from South Korea, raised his hand. He hadn't spoken much before, but now he seemed eager to ask something important. He said, "I read and watch English movies. I understand a lot when I listen, but my pronunciation is not good. I feel shy to speak because I think others won't understand me. What can I do to speak more clearly?" Everyone in the room nodded. Many of us had the same problem. Understanding English and speaking English are two very different skills. You might understand every word in a film, but when it's your turn to talk, your mouth refuses to cooperate. Our teacher paused thoughtfully, then said, "This is a very common issue, and you are not alone. Let me explain something about pronunciation. It's not just about knowing how words are spelt or what they mean. It's also about how you move your mouth." She continued, "When you speak your native language, your mouth muscles follow patterns that feel natural, but English has different sounds, ones that may not exist in your language. To pronounce them correctly, you have to train your mouth to move differently." Then she introduced us to a technique called shadowing. The shadowing method, she said, is very simple but incredibly effective. You listen to a native speaker and repeat exactly what they say. At the same time or just a second behind, you try to copy their pronunciation, intonation, rhythm, even their pauses. She explained that it was like singing along with a song, but instead of music, you're mimicking spoken English. This helps your brain and your mouth work together. Over time, your pronunciation becomes smoother, more natural, and more confident. To demonstrate, our teacher opened a video on YouTube. It was a short clip of a native English speaker talking slowly and clearly. She asked us to listen first, then play it again, and try shadowing. At first, it felt awkward. Trying to speak while listening was harder than we expected. Some students fell behind, others got tongue-tied. But after a few minutes, we began to get the rhythm. To the exercise, she said, it's okay if you can't keep up at first. Like any muscle, your mouth needs training. The first time you do shadowing, your jaw might hurt after 5 minutes, and that's a good sign. It means you're using new muscles. One student, the same Korean classmate, said, "It was hard, but I liked it. It felt like I was really speaking English, not just thinking about it." Our teacher encouraged us to use this method at home. If you have a presentation in English, do shadowing the night before. You'll notice a big improvement in how you speak. Even 10 minutes of shadowing a day can change your pronunciation within a few weeks. I found the technique fascinating. I had never heard of shadowing before, but it made sense. Children learn to speak by copying their parents over and over until they get it right. Why shouldn't we do the same as adult learners? That evening, I tried shadowing again, this time with an English podcast. I chose a short episode and played it at 75% speed. I sat in my room, repeating after the speaker, imitating their tone and stress patterns. It felt strange at first, but also exciting. I could hear myself improving with each sentence. Over the next few days, I made shadowing part of my daily routine. Whether I was walking to school, riding the bus, or taking a break from work, I would listen to English and repeat what I heard. Slowly, my mouth got used to the movements. I stopped second-guessing myself. My sentences sounded smoother, more confident. By the end of the week, even my classmates noticed. One of them said, "Your pronunciation sounds different now. Did you practice a lot?" I smiled and said, "Yes, I've been doing shadowing every day. It really works." And it did. Shadowing wasn't just about pronunciation. It also helped with my listening skills, my confidence, and even my grammar. I wasn't just hearing English. I was speaking it, feeling it, becoming it. Part 8. Speaking your thoughts out loud. Thursday morning brought a new face to our class. A student named Elizabeth joined us. She was from Italy with a calm and confident presence. From the moment she started speaking, we could tell she was different. Her English was clear, fluent, and natural. Her pronunciation was smooth, her tone comfortable. Many of us looked at each other, surprised. A teacher greeted her warmly. Elizabeth was in my class last summer for just 2 weeks, she told us. It was a beginner class, but look at her now. Naturally, we were curious. How had she gone from beginner to fluent in such a short time? Elizabeth smiled and said, I didn't attend any other classes after that summer course. I learned mostly by myself. I used the techniques our teacher shared, reading, shadowing, and something called thinking aloud. I practiced every day, and I kept going even when it was difficult. We were impressed. Some students had studied English for years and still struggled to speak confidently. Yet Elizabeth, after just a short course and months of self-study, was clearly ahead. I raised my hand and asked, what is thinking aloud? I've never heard of that technique before. Our teacher nodded. It's a very effective method, but also a little unusual, she said with a smile. To do it, you need strong motivation and a bit of boldness. Let me explain. He continued, normally, we think in our native language. Every day, thousands of thoughts run through our minds, and we think in the language that is most natural to us. But when you start thinking in English and actually say those thoughts out loud, you're training your brain to speak more fluently. It's like practicing conversation, she said, but with yourself. Then the teacher turned to Elizabeth and asked, would you mind sharing how you used the thinking aloud technique? Elizabeth agreed without hesitation. At first, it was really strange, she admitted. I started with very simple sentences. I would say things like, I can speak English, I want to get better, I don't know many words, but I can still express myself. She laughed softly and added, sometimes I felt silly, especially if someone heard me, but it helped me a lot. She explained that one of the hardest parts was adjusting her thoughts. In Italian, she said, my thoughts were long and complicated, but I couldn't translate them directly into English, so I had to learn to think in simple English. That was the real challenge, she continued. Thinking in English required me to simplify my ideas. At first it was hard, but after a few weeks it became natural, and then something amazing happened. I met a tourist from Australia, and we had a real conversation. I didn't have to translate in my head, I just spoke. The class was quiet for a moment, taking it all in. This wasn't just about learning grammar or vocabulary, it was about transforming the way you think. Elizabeth concluded, now I use this technique every day. Even when I'm alone, I talk to myself in English. I describe what I'm doing, how I'm feeling, or what I see around me. It's helped me become more fluent and more comfortable speaking. Our teacher smiled and said, thinking aloud might feel strange at first, but it's one of the most powerful habits you can build. It forces you to form complete sentences, to connect ideas and to become aware of the gaps in your language ability. Over time, you'll notice those gaps getting small. That night, I decided to try it myself. I waited until I was alone in my room and began speaking my thoughts out loud. At first, I didn't know what to say. I simply said, I am learning English. I want to improve. I am speaking to myself. It felt silly, but also freeing. Nobody was listening. There was no pressure. I could be honest, make mistakes, and correct myself as I went. I began talking about my day, my feelings, and what I planned to do tomorrow. In just 10 minutes, I found that I was thinking faster in English. My brain was making connections more quickly. I wasn't translating from my native language. I was actually starting to think in English. From that day forward, thinking aloud became part of my routine. Whether I was walking alone, cooking dinner, or riding the train, I turned my thoughts into spoken English. Slowly but surely, I could feel my speaking improving. Part 9. Grammar without the stress. After just a few weeks in London, my progress in English was becoming more noticeable, not just to me, but also to those around me. I was reading more confidently, listening with better comprehension, and even having casual conversations without as much hesitation. But there was still one area that made me feel unsure: grammar. One day after class, a student raised a question that felt very personal to me. Sometimes when I speak, I don't know if I'm using the right grammar. Should I study more grammar rules to fix that? The question made our teacher smile. That's a common concern, she said gently. Let me share something important with all of you. There are two kinds of English learners. One group wants to speak fluently and naturally, and the other wants to pass language exams. She turned to the class. If your main goal is to speak English in everyday life, to travel, work, make friends, or live abroad, then you don't need to worry too much about grammar rules. In fact, you can learn grammar naturally, just as you learned your first language. This idea was both comforting and exciting. I remembered how I had learned to speak my native language. No one had given me grammar lessons as a child. I just listened, copied, made mistakes, and slowly got better. Could English really work the same way? Our teacher went on, books are written with proper grammar. When you read often, your brain gets used to correct sentence structure, and when you do shadowing, you're repeating well-formed English out loud. Both reading and shadowing train your brain to recognize what sounds right without needing to memorize grammar charts. Still, she acknowledged that some people feel better when they have structure. If you're curious and want to check the rules, there's a great website called grammarinlevels.com. It organizes grammar by your vocabulary level, 1,200 or 300 words. You can find short explanations and examples that match your level. But again, it's a tool, not a requirement. That afternoon, I visited the website she mentioned. It was simple and easy to follow. I started at the 2,000 word level and found grammar points explained with short examples. I read a few and tried to use them in sentences later that day. It felt much more manageable than a thick grammar textbook. Later that week, I noticed something interesting at work. I was speaking to a customer when I suddenly used a past tense verb correctly without even thinking about it. It just came out naturally. I smiled to myself. All those hours of reading and shadowing were paying off. The grammar was no longer this scary wall I had to climb. It was something I was absorbing bit by bit, like background music in a movie. I wasn't studying it directly, but it was becoming part of how I used the language. Of course, I still made mistakes. Sometimes I said he goes instead of he goes, or forgot the past tense. But instead of feeling embarrassed, I treated those moments as stepping stones. Every mistake taught me something. Our teacher reminded us of that too. You don't need to be perfect, she said. Even native speakers make grammar mistakes sometimes. What matters is that you're understood and that you keep improving. As someone who used to fear grammar, this approach changed everything. I stopped treating grammar like a subject to master and started treating it like a skill that would grow with experience. Now, when people ask me how I learned grammar, I don't say I studied hard. I say I read every day. I shadowed native speakers. I used English in real conversations, and slowly grammar came to me. Part 10, fucking measuring my progress. The following Monday, our teacher began class with a cheerful question. So what did everyone do over the weekend? As students shared their experiences, I proudly said, I worked on Saturday. I'm starting to feel more comfortable speaking with the customers now. One of the girls in class turned to me and smiled. Your pronunciation sounds so much better than last week. What happened to your voice? You sound like a different person. I couldn't help but laugh. I practiced shadowing all Saturday evening and all day Sunday, I explained. I was trying to speak like a native speaker. It wasn't perfect, but I could feel the difference. Our teacher was delighted to hear that. That's fantastic, Ariel. Shadowing helps with more than just pronunciation. It improves rhythm, intonation, and sentence flow. She then asked the class, did anyone else try shadowing over the weekend? A few hands went up. One student from South Korea said he had practiced too and really enjoyed it. Another said she tried it but had to stop after 5 minutes because her mouth started to hurt. Our teacher smiled knowingly. That's actually a good sign, she said. If your mouth hurts, it means you're using new muscles. Think of it like going to the gym for the first time. Your body isn't used to the exercise, but it gets stronger with time. She continued, at the beginning, the recordings might feel too fast. If that happens, just focus on repeating the first or last word of each sentence. With practice, you'll be able to shadow full sentences smoothly. I nodded. That had been my experience exactly. On Saturday, I struggled, but by Sunday night, I could follow full conversations more easily. And then I asked a question that had been on my mind. I visited the Grammar on Levels website, and it mentions vocabulary levels like 1,002, 0, and 30 words. But how do I know how many English words I already know? The teacher's eyes lit up. I'm glad you asked. Most students don't know how large their vocabulary is, but there's a simple way to find out. She told us about a website called testyourvocab.com or a similar language testing site. It's free and quick, she explained. It has only 2 steps and it gives you an estimate of how many English words you know. I recommend taking the test once a month to track your progress. She encouraged us to take out our smartphones and do the test right then. Curious and excited, we followed her suggestion. In just a few minutes, I received my result. I knew about 2,100 English words. That was more than I expected. Other students shared their results. Most of us were in the 2,000 to 2,200 range. Only 2 classmates had higher scores, Monica and the boy from South Korea, who both knew over 200, 500 words. The teacher explained, if you know around 2,000 words, you're ready to move on to level 3 on grammar levels. That level focuses on more advanced grammar and vocabulary that you'll need for fluent conversation. It felt incredibly satisfying to have a concrete number for my vocabulary. For months, I had been learning blindly, unsure of how much I'd improved, but now I had a way to measure my growth. It motivated me to keep going, to read more, speak more, and shadow more. From that day on, I made a habit of checking my vocabulary once a month. Sometimes I saw big jumps, other times just small increases, but every time I saw progress, and that was what mattered. Tracking my learning helped me stay focused and gave me a clear picture of how far I had come. It wasn't about comparing myself to others. It was about becoming better than I was yesterday. Part 11. Embracing mistakes and moving forward. The next day at school, a student raised a question that struck a deep chord with many of us. She said quietly, I want to practice speaking with people, but I'm afraid. I don't want to make mistakes and sound stupid. What should I do? The room was silent for a moment. It was a vulnerable, honest question, one we had all thought about at some point. Our teacher responded with warmth and sincerity. That's one of the most important questions you can ask, she said. So let me be honest with you. Mistakes are not just okay, they are necessary. She went on to share her own story. I'm currently learning Spanish, she said, and when I speak, I make a lot of mistakes, but I don't care. Why? Because my goal is not to be perfect. My goal is to communicate, and every mistake I make is part of the learning process. Then she said something that I will never forget. Think about how children learn their first language. They make grammar mistakes, pronunciation errors, and use the wrong words all the time. But do they stop speaking? No. They just keep going, and eventually they become fluent. That comparison really made sense. Children don't worry about sounding silly, they just speak, and through speaking and making many mistakes, they improve. Naturally, why shouldn't we do the same? Our teacher added, perfection is not the goal is progress. If you wait until your English is perfect before speaking, you will wait forever. Instead, speak now, make mistakes now, and learn from every one of them. She encouraged us to think of ourselves as language athletes. Just like a musician has to practice or an athlete has to train, you need to exercise your language muscles. And in practice, things are messy. But that's okay. Messy is how you grow. I thought back to my own experience. I had been afraid to speak at first too. I was worried people would laugh at my pronunciation or my grammar. But every time I had pushed through that fear, whether it was greeting someone at work, asking a question in class, or chatting with a classmate, I had grown stronger. Now I realized those small imperfect moments were the foundation of everything I had achieved. Later that day, I read out loud from an English article, repeating difficult sentences, even though I stumbled. Then I went to work and served a group of customers from Canada. We had a short, friendly conversation, and even though I made a few small errors, they smiled and responded warmly. They understood me. And that's what mattered most. That evening, I wrote a note in my journal. I will not fear mistakes. I will speak, I will learn, and I will keep going. It became my motto. In our final class that week, the teacher wrapped up with the reminder. The secret to learning English is simple. Do a little every day. Read, listen, think, speak, make mistakes, and never give up. And as I looked around the classroom, at the students who had become my friends, at the teacher who had guided us with patience and kindness, I felt a sense of pride. I wasn't just learning English, I was learning how to learn, how to stay brave, how to keep moving forward even when it felt slow. I'd started this journey with a short conversation on a train, filled with broken sentences and nervous smiles, and now I could express my thoughts, share my experiences, and dream in a new language. Was I perfect? No. Was I fluent? Not quite. But was I improving every single day? Absolutely. And that was enough.